5:35 a.m. The all clear sounded in London.
The weekend the Germans didn't invade. Part 3. Resumption.
Reports of the extensive bombing were typed up for the Civil Defence Report. The damage was still being assessed at many places. The report on Ardale School, Essex stated, HE bomb in rear of school buildings, no casualties. Would like someone to inspect buildings as to their safety as soon as possible. Bomb in boys' playground against school wall and time bomb in the lavatories. Stretcher party post evacuated. Schoolkeeper at 89 Rotherhithe New Road. Bomb hit school passing through Assembly Hall. Extensive damage.
5:39 a.m. Twilight begins in Kirkwall.
3 of London's main railway termini were out of action. London Bridge, Victoria and Waterloo stations were all on the Southern Railway network. Reports came in that at least 10 of London's other stations had been damaged. One of the 2 road tunnels under the River Thames, Rotherhithe, suffered considerable damage on the northern approaches and the tunnel was closed.
5:49 a.m. Twilight London.
5:52 a.m. Curfew and blackout ends at Hastings.
6 a.m. The 9:30 p.m. Liverpool Street to Chingford service, which had been stuck on Bow Viaduct most of the night, finally moves on.
6 a.m. The Reverend Moan got up and cooked breakfast. The previous evening he'd gone to find out how his parishioners, the Simpkins, had fared. Their house had been destroyed and Mervyn Simpkin had gone to Beckenham Hospital suffering from a bruised shoulder and shock. Peter rang the vicarage and the minister went to collect mother and son and bring them back to his home.
6:01 a.m. Twilight, Cardiff.
6:06 a.m. Twilight, Belfast.
The Civil Defence Report contained many requests for shovels, brooms, ropes, hand lamps, leather gloves, and in some cases contractors to help shift the rubble. Help from other fire regions had been requested, and help was being sent from London. The only large movement of refugees had been from East Ham.
BBC Forces Programme. 06:15 hours, news in French. 06:30 hours, Rivale, a cheerful selection of gramophone records.
BBC Home Services. 6:45 a.m. News in Norwegian.
6:23 a.m. Sunrise, London.
Air Raid Warden Barbara Nixon described the scene as the sun rose. Groups of pale and jaded people trail back to their homes to snatch a cup of tea before leaving for work. All the rumours of war and the warnings of aerial bombardment of the last 5 years, all the bombings of the Spanish towns, the destruction of Warsaw and Rotterdam, had not made them pause to think what it might be like when we came to them, and they were shocked and stunned. London had changed.
6:24 a.m. Sunrise, Kirkwall.
In West Ham, accommodation was needed for over 1,000 now homeless people.
S. Woodcock was an air raid warden working in the Woolwich area. When the all clear went at about 6:30, he was surprised to find some of the electricity substations still working. At 6:45 a.m, he saw an Italian ice cream seller appear and soon sell out.
BBC Forces Programme. 0700 hours, prayers conducted by the Director of Religious Broadcasting. 0703, news. 0720, on parade. Popular artists and bands fall in for your entertainment on gramophone records.
BBC Home Services. 7 a.m. Prayers conducted by the Director of Religious Broadcasting. 7:03 a.m. News. 7:20 a.m. Claydon Quintet, Arthur Glenhorn flute.
Talk of the night's events continued to ripple round. On 11th September, the Home Intelligence Report noted People in Exeter were very much impressed by the keenness of the Home Guard to get to grips with the reported invaders during the weekend. In Scotland, however, considerable talk among the Home Guard in the West about the call-out over the weekend is reported, and some say they will refuse to turn out on a fool's errand again.
7:30. The 9:30 p.m. Liverpool to Chingford service finally arrives. Captain Watterson would soon be writing a letter of complaint about the 31-minute journey that took 10 hours.
Tom Betts, separated from his family, was bandaged at the first aid shelter in the shelter and then taken to the Middle May mission. During the journey, the man on the stretcher above him dies. The mission and several of the hospitals were already full, so he ended up at the one at Kingsland Road.
BBC Home Services. 7 a.m. Prayers. Conducted by the Director of Religious Broadcasting. 7:03 a.m. News. 7:20 a.m. Claydon Quintet. Arthur Gleghorn, flute.
BBC Forces Programme On Parade continues.
The Sunday People carried the headline, Biggest Daylight Raid of the War Beaten Off, while it mentioned damage to the East End and at least one Greyhound stadium. It also carried the claim that the RAF had shot down its 4,000 enemy airmen.
The People were also concerned about how air raids were changing fashion. The paper claimed, trousers are the rage. It went on. More of Britain's women are wearing trousers than ever before in history. Factories are turning out thousands of pairs a day. Retail shops are selling out as soon as they get a delivery and are placing repeat orders. Hitler is responsible. Trousers are wanted to wear in air raid shelters and refuge rooms. They are much warmer when the whole night must be spent in the shelter, and they are quick to put on in an emergency. Those sold for air raids, therefore, are of heavier material than those that have been in the shops in previous years. However, elsewhere in the paper it was noted that some men were not happy with this as they saw it as a challenge to their authority.
BBC Home Services. 8 a.m. A programme of gramophone records, Boston Symphony Orchestra. 8:30 a.m. Florence de Jong at the organ.
BBC Forces Programme On Parade continues.
9:30 a.m. Trowbridge Company, HQ, commanded by Major E.A. Macker, were ordered to meet up at the barracks in drill order, no rifles, for church parade. The Home Guard were involved with activities on every day of the week but Saturdays. The previous week they'd met up on the miniature range on Monday, Wednesday and Friday. The runners paraded on Monday, headquarters platoon on Tuesday and Thursday, while bombing instructions was Monday to Friday at the county ground.
9:30 a.m. Air Vice Marshal Keith Park taxis his personal Hurricane across Northolt, takes off and heads towards London to see for himself the damage done to London the previous night. He later commented, "It was burning all down the river. It was a horrid sight. But I looked down and said thank God for that, because I knew the Nazis had switched their attack from the fighter stations, thinking that they were knocked out. They weren't, but they were pretty groggy."
Unlike the Germans, the British authorities were concerned that its pilots had periods of rest and recovery. The welfare officer of the RAF wrote to WVS officers noting, "Continuous operational flying produces in some cases flying tiredness, but it has been found that if tired operational crews can be given 48 hours change of environment, they are able to resume their full duty with complete vigour." The letter from the WVS, which made it into the Rochdale Observer, sought volunteers to send details of how many guests they could have, if this included officers' wives and when they could be received. The RAF had divided the crews into A. Unmarried flying officers, B. Married flying officers whose wives are at or near the station, C. Pilot NCOs and a few airmen.
The Sunday Mirror headlined with 500 planes raid London, big fires. The paper asked celebrities what they did when the sirens went.
Somerset Maugham, the famous playwright, recorded, "I stay in bed and I'm extremely annoyed when the all clear wakes me at about 5 in the morning."
George Allison, Arsenal's manager, said, "I'm generally unlucky and get caught travelling. I always continue my journey believing that one place is as vulnerable as another. When I'm home, I take advantage of the dugout as a precaution. It would be folly to tempt fate by a false bravado."
Gordon Harker, star of Once a Crook, my wife and I go down to the kitchen and rest in camp beds. But one important part of the raid warning, I always take a bottle of whiskey. Then I don't mind when the all clear goes.
BBC Forces programme On Parade continues. 10:30 hours for Indian Forces. Varied items specially designed for the Indian troops.
BBC Home Services. 9 a.m. News and summary of today's Home Service programmes. 9:15 a.m. Interlude Records. 9:25 a.m. National Day of Prayer. Morning Service. The lessons will be read by Dr. Robert Bond, moderator of the Federal Council of the Evangelical Free Churches of England.
10 a.m. Taylor's Motor Tours left the Market Square, Chester, for a run out to Llandudno via Battersea Coed. The price was 7 and 6. The company ran 7 trips to Blackpool on Saturdays, Sundays and Wednesdays. Those on a budget could go on the 2:30 p.m. afternoon drive round North Wales or the evening drive round the Wirral for 2 and 6.
The Liverpool Ramblers Association has a busy day planned. The CHA Ramblers were meeting at the Woodside Ferry at 10, then taking the 10:15 train to Hollywood Junction and exploring Gorseth. The LCS Ramblers Club were off to Parkston.
In an age of rationing, the government was keen to get as many people involved in food production as possible. An advert in the Sunday Pictorial pointed out that blackberries are ripening fast all over the country. Don't neglect this good and health-giving fruit. Try to organise blackberry picking parties, but take care to close all gates and avoid trampling crops.
Civil defence depended on the volunteer work of many. In Belton, just as in communities across the country, the volunteers attended church parade. At 10 a.m, the Home Guard under Platoon Commander Swift, the Special Constabulary under Section Leader Bean, the Air Raid Wardens and the First Aid Detachment gathered at the parish church.
Reconnaissance flights by enemy aircraft are reported from Sunderland to the Wash.
10:30 a.m. 43 Squadron leave Tangmere. They'd been under pressure for an extraordinary length of time, and their involvement yesterday over Kent and South London had been punishing. Unlike the Luftwaffe, the RAF rotated men and squadrons to keep them fresh. They were ordered to make to Usworth for a rest.
One of their Hurricanes, during the ferry flight north, had its engine seized up over Gedney Dye in Lincolnshire. Pilot Officer Gray managed to make a false landing, saving himself and the plane.
Tom Betts is carried out of Kingsland Road Hospital and put on the Green Line coach, which had been converted to take stretchers. He is taken to the Chase Farm Hospital in Enfield.
The London County Council had responsibility for dealing with those made homeless by the bombing. So far, they had dealt with 10,000 people. Silvertown had been virtually emptied of people who had gone to neighbouring boroughs.
10:45 a.m. Killer Memorial Church Epworth advertised its service in the local paper under the proclamation, "The King Calling." It continued, "Our King desires us to observe a day of national prayer." The Reverend W.A.R. Collins was to preach. The advert ended with the hope, "Will you join us? If not, please worship somewhere."
BBC Forces programme. 1100 hours. Sunday morning service from a garrison church. 11:45 hours. Programme summary followed by entract players.
BBC Home Services. 11 a.m. Orchestral concert conducted by Guy Warwick. 11:45 a.m. Recorded excerpts from operas by Handel.
Colin Perry typed up his diary and watched out the window for more action.
11:30. Radar detects a formation over the channel as it heads on a northwesterly course, crossing the coast near Deal. 41 squadrons Spitfires were already on routine patrol are sent towards the Dover area, while 46 squadrons Hurricanes, 222 squadrons Spitfires and 605 squadrons Hurricanes were scrambled to intercept. The target was identified as 20 plus DO-17 bombers with 30 BF-109s as escort.
BBC Forces Programme. 12:15 hours, news in French. 12:30 hours, Billy Merrin and his commanders.
BBC Home Services. Recorded excerpts from operas by Handel continues. 12:20 p.m. Kenneth Bigot at the theatre organ. 12:45 p.m. Everyman's Music with Reginald Jakes.
In Eltham, Bill Snellgrove had been awake all night in his garden, reading by the light of the flames. Waking about midday, he saw a large double-decker bus bringing the homeless from North Woolwich out of the ruins. His mother and neighbour, Mrs. Collins, set about making them tea and preparing food.
12:15 p.m. 41 Squadron Spitfires attack the German bombers over Deal but are forced to deal with their fighter escort,
and the bomber formation continues across Kent.
12:40. Although badly mauled, 46 Squadron keeps up the attack, and together with 222 Squadron and 605 Squadron shoot down one of the German BF-109s near Sevenoaks. 2 Hurricanes move in and finally bring down one of the DO-17s over Maidstone. The Dornier bombers move inland, coming under attack by anti-aircraft gunfire.
BBC Home Services. 1 p.m. News. 1:15 p.m. Sylvan Trio. John Francis flute, Joy Boughton oboe, Millicent Silver piano. 1:45 p.m. Calendar's senior band, conductor Tom Morgan.
BBC Forces Programme. 1300 hours, news in Dutch. 13:15, very tasty, very sweet. Number 6 of the series written by Douglas Young with Nan Kenway, Douglas Young, Charles Hislop and Helen Raymond. Dance Orchestra directed by Billy Tennant. Produced by Reginald Smith. 13:50 hours, Saints in Caesar's Household 2. Where Are They? The Reverend A.D. Gilbertson, CB, OBE.
1:05 p.m. Air raid sirens go off along the east coast. German reconnaissance flights are reported between Sunderland and the Wash.
1:42 p.m. All clear sirens given in the northeast.
Air intelligence reported that of the 100 prisoners of war that he had taken, morale among the fighter pilots was outstanding, but the bomber crews were not as high. Many were showing signs of nervous exhaustion.
BBC Home Services. 2:15 p.m. In Your Garden with Roy Hay. 2:30 p.m. Sunday orchestral concert, BBC Orchestra, conductor Sir Adrian Bolt.
BBC Forces Programmes. 1400 hours, music from 2 English counties, Warwickshire and Oxfordshire. 1420, Vincent Tilsley's Royal Master Singers with Charles Cornford. 1440, light piano pieces with Wilfred Parry.
2 p.m. Salton Hall, Pentcaitland, Minto House, Harwick and Holcaston, Musselburgh opened their grounds to the public in aid of Queen's Institute and District Nursing. These and other gardens charged 6 pennies for visitors and 1 shilling for those who still had a car. While tea and biscuits were available, attendees were politely requested to bring their own sugar.
Cheltenham Town Hall opens for the use of servicemen and women in uniform. About 300 to 350 people were taking advantage of the half-price concerts and YMCA canteen, run by Mrs. J. H. Try and her voluntary women. The Spa Orchestra were playing this evening at 8 p.m.
2:30 p.m. The Communist Party of Rochdale held its 20th anniversary party in Small Hall, Hanging Road. Frank Bright and Albert Matthews were the speakers.
2:30, Red Cross Cricket. In support of the Red Cross, a Leeds Wednesday half-holiday Cricket League 11 efforts to aid the Red Cross will play LICS at the Gelded Road ground.
The Northern Daily Mail would report on a Spitfire Fund match. The cricket match at Park Drive yesterday between teams selected by W.H. Elkirk and Jack Carr realised £29, 5 shillings and 11 pennies for the Spitfire Fund. This total is apart from the sale of tickets. It included £17, 18 shillings and 9 pennies from collection on the ground and £11, 7 shillings, 2 pence, proceeds of the afternoon tea kindly provided by Mr. and Mrs. George Hornsley. The game ended in a draw. Jack Carr, with 24, was top scorer for his side, who were all out for 98. S. Harker, Normanby Hall, performed the hat-trick. Elcott's team got 91 for 4 wickets and the match was abandoned.
1500 hours. The Bury St Edmunds British Legion were attending the special intercession service at the cathedral. It was requested that all members should make an earnest endeavour to turn up at headquarters at 1500, medals and decorations to be worn.
3 p.m. The Gaumont Cinema, Birmingham, shows Pinocchio. Evening performances were starting earlier in response to reduced bus service. The issue of Sunday film showing was troubling the authorities. The war had changed the attitudes and cinemas were now allowed to open on the Lord's Day. The actual decision was left to each local authority and the results were patchy. Haverhill District Council reaffirmed its decision to keep Sunday special this week, whereas Weston-super-Mare decided to allow films for wartime only.
3 p.m. Elsie Sotheby, Hubert Davies, violinist, Reginald Paul, pianist, and David Williams, organist, began a concert at St Jordan's Church, Cardiff. They were there at the behest of the National Council of Music for the encouragement of music and the arts. The organisation had been established in January to boost morale by promoting the arts. It would evolve into the Arts Council.
BBC Home Services, 3:30 p.m. Our duty to God and our duty to the state. 2. God and my neighbour. A.D. Lindsay, CBE, Master of Balliol College, Oxford. 3:45 p.m. Orchestre Raymond. Conductor George Walter.
BBC Forces Programme. 1500 hours. Music while you work, played by Billy Hardy and his band. 1530 hours. Dream Hawaii with 3 in harmony, accompanied by the Hula Players. Musical arrangements by James Moody, produced by Eric Fawcett. 1545, Orchestra Raymond, conducted by George Walter.
Home Intelligence did not issue a report on Sundays. The Monday report was extensive, and while the general tone was generally positive, signs of a community under stress and existing prejudices showed through.
In the areas which have been most heavily raided, there has been little sign of panic and none of defeatism, but rather of bitterness and increased determination to see it through. There is widespread and deeply felt apprehension, which is apparent mostly in London Dock area, of a continuation of raids, and much anxiety about the chaos in domestic affairs, which has resulted from the activities of the last few nights.
Men working in factories in the East End are encouraging their wives and families in this haphazard escape, but express their own willingness to stay and face further raids if they can be sure that their relations are in comparative safety.
There is continued criticism of the BBC's method of announcing casualties and raid details. Special exception was taken to Charles Gardner's broadcast on Saturday, and it is suggested that what is wanted by the public in its present frame of mind is the kind of encouragement which can only be given by a real working-class man who has been himself through the worst of the recent raids.
BBC Home Services, 4:15 p.m. Ask It Basket number 3, another problem race prepared by Neil Munro and Morley Adams. 4:45 p.m. Comrades for Freedom, our allies, the Czechs. Life in Britain is seen by our allies, their views on what we are fighting for, stories of their adventures in reaching these shores, with songs and music of Czechoslovakia.
BBC Forces Programme, 16:15 hours. Connie Boswell, America's Queen of Swing. Her story told by Alan Keith with the aid of a few gramophone records. 16:45 hours. Richard Telfer at the theatre organ. Melodies of the Moment.
4:30 p.m. The Chiefs of Staff met again. Air Chief Marshal Sir Cyril Newell, Chief of the Air Staff, chaired the first part of the meeting. They discussed the positioning of heavy artillery to defend the beaches.
BBC Home Services. 5 p.m. News in Welsh. 5:15 p.m. Children's Hour. 5:15 Desert Islands I Have Visited, a talk for all children by Dr. Thomas Wood. 5:30 p.m. A children's service for the National Day of Prayer, conducted by the Reverend A.D. Gilbertson, Warden of the Royal Merchant Navy School. Organist and choirmaster W.H. Hickton.
BBC Forces Programme, 1700, Follow the Drum, The County Regiment. 3 by Major J.T. Gorman with the BBC Military Band. Conductor P.S.G. O'Donnell. Narrator Stuart Hibbard. 1730, Canadian Variety, a programme of light entertainment specifically recorded for Canadians on active service in this country. Recorded through the cooperation of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Sunday may have been a day of rest, but Monday was washing day. With wartime demands on time and resources, Rinso advertised in The People that there was no need now to boil clothes. The advert continued, "New washing method gives brilliant results. Saves over half your wash day fuel. Makes clothes last longer. Gets the washing finished 1.5 hours earlier. Makes hard rubbing unnecessary."
The People was also giving domestic tips in the kitchen. The housewife was asking for readers to send in their favourite rabbit recipes. A Mrs. C. Dolphin of Sunnyside, Wadborough, Worcester, had contributed autumn duck. Readers would need a pound of stale bread crusts, soaked and broken up, a pound of parboiled onions finely chopped, a tablespoon of sage, 3 ounces of suet, a tablespoon of custard powder, and a little milk. Shaped into a duck and baked with a little dripping, it was to be served with thick brown gravy and apple sauce.
Theatres, like cinemas, were dealing with the new opportunities of Sunday opening, still mostly for concerts and the new restrictions. Performances were starting early as late bus services were cut, and the problems of letting people out without breaking the blackout had already led to the fining of Gabriel Watson, sometimes of the Villa Street Theatre, Sunderland, for showing a light.
BBC Home Services. 6 p.m. News followed by interlude. Records. 6:30 p.m. News in Norwegian. 6:45 p.m. In It Together, Mediterranean. Noel Barber interviewing Joseph Sultana, Malta, and Michael Kakoyanis, Cyprus.
BBC Forces Programmes, 1800 hours, news in Dutch and French. 1830 hours, The Sunday Nighters, a Forces show with Adelaide Hall. 1855, weekly newsletter, surveying some of the week's news as seen from London and reviewing the new shows and films seen in London during the week.
6:30 p.m. A special service for the auxiliary fire services, ARP workers and the fighting services began at St James's Church, Yorkshire Street, Rochdale.
6:45 p.m. Joe Loss and his band began their concert at Colston Hall, Bristol. Tickets cost between 1 and 3p and 2 and 6p. Promoters advertised the concert would end at 8:45, so the audience would have time to catch the bus home.
The Home Intelligence Department report, covering midday from the 7th to midday on the 9th of September for the North Midland region, Nottingham, reported, "The impression of Hitler's speech is that it was that of a frustrated criminal. There is a complaint from Chesterfield that details of the damage to Ramsgate should not have been delayed until the Premier's speech. In Grimsby it is suggested that daily reports of damage and casualties would be less alarming than monthly reports. It is felt in Rutland that householders who have had evacuees since war broke out are now tired of them and would welcome a shuffle round to other householders. Complaints have been received that the fixed price for plum jam is excessive.
BBC Home Services, 7 p.m. Songs from the Rebel Maid, a romantic light opera.
BBC Forces programme. 1915 hours, Radio Orange, a programme in Dutch under the auspices of the Dutch government. 1930 hours, Sunday half hour, community hymn singing followed by a short service conducted by Ronald Biggs. 7:15, the Regal Trowbridge began to show this evening's programme. The main picture, for one night only, was a film that had been released the previous November, The Arsenal Stadium Mystery. Set in the Highbury Stadium during a match, one of Arsenal's opponents, the Trojans, a fictional amateur side, drops dead and suspicion falls on his former mistress and his teammates. The film starred Leslie Banks. Extensive film career would include the role of Chorus in Olivier's Henry V, and also Norwegian future star Greta Gint. It was directed by Thorold Dickinson, whose next film would be Gaslight. The action shots for the film were done during Arsenal's last match of the season of the 6th of May 1939 against Brentford. Several Arsenal players had roles in the field, but only manager George Allison had a speaking role.
The supporting movie was The Film Next Door, a Universal Pictures hour-long domestic comedy where regular guy plumber George Pearce, played by Hugh Herbert, is caught up in his social pretensions of Mrs. Pearce, Ruth Donnelly.
7:30, the air raid sirens sound again in London. 250 bombers from Luftflotte 3 targeted the city. Many of the warehouses along the Thames again became targets and buildings. The casualty rate on this night totalled 412 people dead, with 747 injured. Compared to the previous night, that was more people killed, but the injured list was much lighter.
7:33 p.m. Sunset, London.
7:46 p.m. Sunset, Cardiff.
The Home Intelligence Department report covering midday the 7th to midday the 9th of September for the southwestern region, Bristol. Rumours of invasion are rife in the region today following the ringing of church bells and the calling out of the Home Guard. The raid on London has been appreciated as serious, and it is realised that though casualties were high, they were not more than was to be expected from a severe attack. It is reported from Plymouth that people consider the BBC tend to gloss over damage by enemy aircraft.
BBC Home Services, 7:55 p.m, National Day of Prayer, evening service. 8:40 p.m, Week's Good Cause, an appeal on behalf of the Channel Islands Refugees Committee by the Right Honourable Lord Justice du Parc. 8:45 p.m, the National Anthems of the Allies.
BBC Forces programme, 2000 hours, List, two famous pieces played by Millicent Silver. 2015 hours, News in French. 2030 hours, Ici la France, on parle en français, pour le français, and pas de français.
8 p.m. The warning sirens continue around London. The capital would be under attack until 5 a.m. the next morning. This time, South London would be relatively free of bombs, whereas boroughs north of the river in Middlesex and Essex were badly hit.
8:03 p.m. Anti-aircraft guns on the Isle of Dogs begin to fire.
8:07 p.m. Blackout begins in Hull.
8 p.m. Twilight ends in London.
The Home Intelligence Department report covering midday 7th to midday 9th September for the Midland region, Birmingham. There are reports from Birmingham, Wolverhampton and the Black Country towns that householders are going to public shelters and taking their bedding with them. It is getting round that many middle-class people leave Birmingham at night by road and sleep in country districts, and many more are doing this at weekends. This is causing annoyance amongst the working class.
Rodney Foster returns to his home in Saltwood after driving his wife to Bog Farm for the night. He was on home guard duties when he was stopped by the local police. His car had undimmed sidelights. He wrote in his diary, "The village constable tried to be uppish, but a special was sympathetic and lent me a handkerchief to put round the lights."
General Alan Brooke wrote in his diary, "Heavy bombing of London throughout the night, the whole sky lit up by the glow of fires in London docks. Went to the office in the morning and evening in complete paradise with you and those 200 small persons. It is so wonderful being able to get into such surroundings for a bit and to forget the war and all its horrors. Motored back at 8:30 with air raid on, searchlights working in all directions and a glowing red sky over London. It seems so strange leaving you and all the wonderful peace and happiness connected with our combined lives. Return here for what may well be the most eventful weeks in the history of the British Empire. I called in at St Paul's School on the way back and found that all reports still point to the probability of an invasion starting between 8th and 10th of this month. The responsibility of feeling what any mistakes or even misapprehensions may mean in the future of these isles and of the Empire is a colossal one, and one which staggers me at times. I wish I had more adequately trained formations under my orders. But for the present there is nothing to be done but trust God and pray for his help and guidance."
8:37 p.m. Twilight ends Belfast.
After 10 days, Tom Bett's father, who has been serving at RAF Sealand in Cheshire, found what hospital he was in. His mother had died of her wounds. He remained in hospital till August 1941, when he went to live with his grandfather.
BBC Home Services, 9 p.m. News. 9:25 p.m. Beethoven, the first 6 quartets, 6. Quartet in B flat. 9:55 p.m. Robert Donat in Dr. Faustus, a tragical history of the Renaissance by Christopher Marlowe, in a shortened version for broadcasting produced by Barbara Burnham.
BBC Forces Programme, 2100 hours, news in German. 21:15 hours, Hi Gang, starring Bibi Daniels, Vic Oliver, Ben Lyon, with Jay Wilbur and his orchestra, the Green Sisters and Sam Brown.
Bomber Command sent 133 planes to attack German ports from Hamburg to Boulogne. The heaviest raid was 49 Hamptons sent to the Blohm and Voss shipyard in Hamburg. 7 aircraft were lost over France and Belgium and 1 over Hamburg.
The Royal Navy sent a cruiser and some destroyers to bombard Boulogne, but bad weather created problems. Destroyers and MTBs which were sent to Calais and along the coast of the south of the port saw nothing. MTBs spotted 20 enemy merchant vessels off Ostend. Helped by flares dropped by aircraft, they sank an estimated 1,000 to 2,000 tons of shipping.
BBC Forces Programme, 2200 hours, National Day of Prayer. Epilogue, In God's Will is Our Peace. 2205 hours, Once in a While. Meet Kay Cavendish and Helen Raymond in a programme arranged and compared by Kay Cavendish. 2220 hours, Dancing Times. Records of famous bands playing popular dance tunes. 22:55, switch to Home Services.
BBC Home Services, 10:45 p.m. National Day of Prayer, Epilogue. 10:55 p.m. Orchestral Concert, Conductor Gideon Fagan.
Unexploded bombs were proving a problem, as were false reports. In one area, only 1 of 29 reported unexploded bombs was actually a bomb. The authorities looked into training people to make a proper investigation first.
Colin Perry watched the anti-aircraft fire over Clapham Common. The firing became so intense his family did not dare make the 18 yards dash to the shelter. He later wrote, "Every moment we fought our last. The guns shook the ceilings and the earth splattered my window. Finally, at 11, I turned in amongst the inferno. I was awakened throughout the night with crashing guns, zooming planes, bomb after bomb. Somehow we survived the night."
BBC Home Services, 11:35 p.m. Harold Ramsey at the theatre organ. 11:53 p.m. And So to Bed, presented by M.H. Allen.
The events of the 7th may have prompted a few more of the volunteer fire watchers to attend to their duties.
The service they provided had not been lost on the authorities, and 2 weeks later the first fire watchers' orders were issued under defence regulations by the Minister for Home Security. Premises which employed more than 30 people worked. Warehouses of more than 50,000 cubic feet and sawmills or timber yards containing more than 50,000 cubic feet of timber had to provide fire watchers.
Despite the appeal of ministers, many people ignored the call to become fire watchers or see their premises had them. In January 1941, all men over 41 were ordered to register at their nearest council office and do fire watching or civil defence work for up to 48 hours a month. A long list of exemptions meant that even as the Blitz went on, not everywhere was guarded.
The Home Intelligence Department report covering midday 7th, midday 9th of September for London. Strongest feeling, one of shock amongst all classes and in all districts, as people have lulled themselves into a state of false security, saying London is the safest place and they'll never get through the London defences. No signs of defeatism, except among small section of elderly women in front lines such as East Ham, who cannot stand constant bombing. Districts sustaining only 1 or 2 shocks soon rally, but in dockside areas the population is showing visible signs of nerve cracking from constant ordeals. Old women and mothers are undermining morale of young women and men by their extreme nervousness and lack of resilience. Men state they cannot sleep because they must keep up morale of their families and express strong desires to get families away from danger areas. Families clinging together, however, and any suggestions of sending children away without mothers and elderly relations considered without enthusiasm. People beginning to trek away from Stepney and other dockside areas in families and small groups. Many encountered in city today with suitcases or belongings. Some make for Paddington without any idea of their destination. All Dockland people afraid large fires will attract German raiders each night and queue up long before dusk to places in large underground shelters. Many expressions of bitterness at apparent impossibility of stopping German raiders doing what they like, and opinion that anti-aircraft gunfire is astonishingly small. The latter point is bewildering and frightening people more than anything else. Lack of sleep already showing signs of undermining morale and working capacity of population. Young black-coated workers in city depressed about news from Africa and express the hope that we can take the offensive there. There is urgent need in rest centres for people rendered homeless, for toys, etc. for the children, and workers are needed to organise games.
On the 9th of September 1940, many of those killed at the weekend were buried in the East London Cemetery, including the men of Abronia. Records were not fully kept, and some doubt as to who had been buried there remained.
While the German invasion planes were soon shelved, the Blitz continued.
On the 4th of November 1940, the Hull Daily Mail carried the list of men who the Admiralty described as missing, presumed dead.
On 10th of September 1940, letters were dispatched to the next of kin of the sailors of HMT Abronia, Royal Navy Patrol Service. John Morley's records were found later in the Devonport files, but no trace could be found of those of Cyril Burrows.
The Abronia was raised in 1941. 3 more skippers would command her until 1945. She was scrapped in 1947.
Colin Perry wanted to join the RAF, and although he passed the medical, did not have the educational qualifications. In 1940, he became a ship's writer, an assistant to a purser on the P&O ship RMS Strathallan. He sailed across the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, operated on without anaesthetic. After an accident at sea, He was on the Strathaven when it was torpedoed and sunk in 1942. In 1943, he enlisted in the Navy, but was discharged when his medical examination found him unfit. Colin returned to the merchant service as an assistant purser and lived into the 21st century.
David Ross's son, David, would be killed when the ship he was serving in the engine room of, the SS Lavington Court, was sunk in July 1942 by U-564 while part of convoy OS-34 sailing from Liverpool to Freetown.
Harold Kerrison did not long outlive his command. He suffered from tuberculosis and died in 1943 at the Scartho Road Infirmary. He left £213, 11 shillings and 11 pence to his widow Kate. Within 4 years, both of Harold and Annie's children would also have died. Annie remarried in 1944 and moved to Scunthorpe with Percy Richardson, an odd job man and later bookies runner. Kate worked for a number of years at the Crosby and Oswald hotels, living on site before moving to Hempdyke Road. Kate lived in Scunthorpe until 1973.
In 1945, Mrs. Langler and Mrs. Morey again sought for the bodies of their sons. Mrs. Morey had recruited her local MP, Michael Foote, to her cause. The Navy stated the problem in finding details was because the civilian casualty organisation had now closed down. In 1946, they wrote explaining that as the men had not been identified and had been buried in a communal grave, it was not possible to allow the transfer of the remains.
The records for Mrs. Langler and Mrs. Morey's search for answers can be found in file ADM 358/2981 at the National Archive at Kew.
The Blitz would continue until May 1941. Between 40 and 43,000 civilians would be killed and possibly up to 139,000 injured. 2 million houses would be destroyed, 60% of those in London, and many, many more would suffer some form of damage. The Germans never invaded, although they did carry on practising for the event well into 1941. By 1944 the threat had so receded that the Home Guard were eventually stood down. The last recorded bomb to fall on the south coast of England happened on the 29th of March 1945. That was part 3 of The Weekend the Germans Didn't Invade, Resumption, performed by the Axholme Academy, its community and friends. The Axholme Academy would like to give special thanks to Richard Baxell, Andy Brockman, Nick Champion, Rachel Jardine, Jamie Jeffries,
Alex Kirkland, Sid Lowe, Sir Paul Preston, Simon Rennie, Marlene Sidaway.
Also taking part were Nigel Amis, Hannah Barnard-Chowdhury, Imogen Barrow, Lee Beasley, Hugo Bell,
Jamie Bennett, Susan Bennyworth, James Biddlecombe, Emma Bramald, Sam Burrows,
Katie Chester, James Cotgrave, Stephen Cross, Graham Diltree, Jane Diltree,
Molly Drury, David Eade, Sheila Eade, Tim Eagling, Darcy Ford,
Tiana Frith, Peter Frost, Harry Griffith, Bronwyn Gwither, Judy Harrison,
Matt Hall, Annie Horgan, Emma Ingleton, Chloe Lee, Tamsin Lee,
Alberto Legido, Mara Legido, Emma Lee, John Kelly, Leanne Kimroy,
Joanne Kilmore, Chris Macker, Brenda Moss, Abigail Ortith, Steph Parkinson,
Kristen Patrick, Ella Pennicott, Oliver Potts, Jake Pullen, Tamara Pullen,
Jack Shaw, Joe Spencer Hall, Carl Thompson, Richard Thorpe, Angus Townley,
Richard Vergett, Kiri Warden, Alicia Walker, Sophie Walker, Ava Waite,
Dan Waite, Helen Waite, Emma Winder, Ellie West and Alex Wood.
The Weekend the Germans Didn't Invade was written and produced by Richard Thorpe.